For those of you who don't know me, my name is Joya Bales, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Senior Associate Dean of the Frank G. Zarb School of Business. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Wynne Nowland to our undergraduate executive speaker series. Wynne is the chairwoman and chief executive officer of Bradley & Parker, a premier insurance, risk management, and financial service firm that is located right here in Melville. Ms. Nowland's major field of expertise is in corporate insurance, particularly sophisticated coverages such as directors and officers' liability, worldwide insurance programs, captive insurance, and participating insurance program. Ms. Nowland currently serves as chairman of the board of the American Heart Association and is also on the board of the Long Island Software and Technology Network, better known as LISNET, and she is past committee member of the Nature Conservancy. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Wynne Nowland.
Innovate, change, adapt, grow, transition. Challenges and words that every business and every business person encounters. Good morning. Thank you for that generous introduction. And I'm pleased to be speaking to you today and also thank the Zarb School of Business here at Hofstra and the Dean for inviting me. I'm going to start with some prepared remarks, but plan to go off script frequently to keep this informal and hopefully conversational. I'll welcome questions at any time, and we'll try to leave some space at the end for any we might not have gotten to. I'm going to start by kind of going over where our firm is today, and then go back to try to review how we got here and how I got where I am. I hope sharing my experiences with you will be of some value as you consider the roads you will take in your education and career choices. So, what I basically plan to do is give you a brief idea of what a company like ours does, how I turned a sales career into an operational and executive one, how our firm moved into a digital environment, how years ago we converted the company ownership of our firm from a privately owned company to one that is owned in large part by its employees, leading a diverse team, and my own personal transition. So, most people, including myself when I was younger, when you talk about insurance, I would immediately cringe. You know, that actor and director who's not in great favor right now, Woody Allen, had a comment that the last person he ever wanted to get stuck in an elevator with was an insurance salesperson. And I kind of remember when I was a kid, my father, who loved everybody, when the insurance guy in the bad leisure suit came to sell us insurance, he wasn't a very happy character. So I think a lot of people have a very negative view of insurance. And, you know, there's a lot of different kinds of insurance. There's life insurance, there's car insurance, there's home insurance. And those things are all important and kind of a societal requirement. But what our firm does is very different than that. We basically take care of the insurance needs of corporations, companies, businesses. And their needs vary greatly from what our own personal needs for. So yeah, they need to have things like car insurance, and they need to have things like insurance in their buildings, but they also have things like if their building burns, or for some reason they can't inhabit their building, they're out of business for 2 or 3 months, there's insurance that helps defray those expenses so that they can keep paying their employees, they can keep paying their bills, and their businesses can survive those kinds of problems. Contractors need liability insurance. When they go put up a big building in the city, everybody wants to make sure they have insurance because in case they make a mistake, they're going to get sued, and the building people all want to make sure that those contractors are covered. companies that sell product here in the United States. They import that product increasingly from countries overseas, but very often in the Asia Pacific. And all that material needs to be insured. It's of great value. It goes on a boat all the way from there to here. So all of these kinds of things are what we do, which I think, again, most people who aren't in this business don't really realize that and have kind of a negative connotation. So don't discount a career in insurance is the moral to that story. My own history, as I was preparing this, this is the first time I've ever talked to students. I talked to business people and association members and things like that, but this is my first chat to students, so if I go off the rails, nobody's going to hold me accountable, I hope. But as I was preparing for this, I was kind of reminded of how I got into this business. I was recruited into this business in 1983. God, I hate to say that. That makes me feel so old, especially in front of all you youngsters. And I got recruited in an environment very, very similar to this. I attended Iona College, which is in New Rochelle, New York, and they had a presentation by a number of executives, and the executives were there to do some presentations and some recruiting. And I was recruited by one of the insurance executives there, and that's how I ended up in this business. And I stole some of my talking points, at least the ones I just mentioned, from him, because he kind of went through the same thing about, this isn't your father's insurance agent, So I started out in 1983, and I was hired as a sales trainee. And I was always in the corporate insurance field, so I was never in the personal lines, which is, again, the homeowners and auto and life insurance. And I started, my territory was Brooklyn, and I started selling small businesses door to door. Because, when you're 22 years old and you don't know anything, you're not going to go to IBM and try to sell them insurance. It's probably not a wise move. So that's kind of how I started. I was with one firm for a couple of years, had an opportunity to move upwards someplace else, which I took that opportunity. And that probably turned out to be the best career choice I ever made, because now, 32, again, these numbers, 32 years later, I'm still with the same firm. So that these days is something of an unusual occurrence. People don't stay at firms the same way they used to in kind of the generation that preceded mine. So I was still a salesperson when I went to that firm. And then I got very lucky because of my still relative youth and inexperience. We were doing insurance for bakeries. It was one of the specialties that we had. And I was going door to door to sell bakeries. And was driving, and just like on the corner here of California Avenue, and I saw Dunkin' Donuts store. And I said, well, geez, they're kind of like a bakery. They obviously buy insurance, why not for me? So, I stopped, talked to a very nice gentleman who explained to me that, he really didn't make the buying decision for Dunkin' Donuts insurance, that was all done in corporate up in Randolph, Massachusetts. So probably if I was like 35 or so at the time, at that point I would have gotten in my car and left. But because I was still young and naive, I asked, well, can I talk to those guys? What's their phone number? So sure enough, they gave it to me, and I called, and from some intervention of the gods, they gave me an appointment. And so I went with two other more senior members of our team, and went up to outside of Boston. And to make a long story short, we ended up selling that account, which was a national account in the millions of dollars in income. So it was a very, very successful venture. I really had no business being there, so I consider myself extremely lucky that I was able to pull that off. And then, and what sometimes happens in business, because of the deal that I had with them, part of my compensation was based upon commissions. And I just landed the big whale of commission. And the senior management team who were, in their 50s at the time, 50s, 40s, they were now looking at paying me more than they were making themselves. So I don't think that went over so well. So instead, they came to me and they said, well, listen, instead of paying you this money, why don't we give you some shares in the company? So I thought about that for a little while and said to myself, well, I've been pretty successful doing this so far, but do I really want to do just sales? And if I want to do just sales, the thing to do is to tell them no, because a big producer is always worth money. But if I wanted to expand and get involved in other areas, the right course of action was to probably say yes, which is what I did. So that kind of started my more or less corporate career. I still handled the Dunkin' Donut account for as long as we had it. I'm still involved now in a lot of client-side issues. They still occasionally wheel me out when they want somebody to give a certain amount of gravitas to a presentation. But I kind of morphed myself from a salesperson into more of an operational person. And the reason I did that was because, there are only so many slots in management and organizations. And when I looked at the company I was with, that I'm still with, that I really loved the people, it was a good culture, everything about it was good, they had a lot of good salespeople. And they had a good sales manager. And they had a good executive vice president who had a sales background. The operations person was getting a little old. So that seemed to me to be a good fit to try to weasel my way in. Isn't that a nice sophisticated term? Weasel my way in to the upper management. So I just kind of morphed my way over and, learned some different skill sets, got very involved in automation and technology, and was able to successfully transition myself, there's that word for the second time, into a kind of a different career. So that kind of brings us to now. And over the last decade, our company has charted a course with a clear destination in sight: to be the premier insurance brokerage providing a comprehensive suite of services utilizing our own people in all areas of specialization. While many others outsource these kinds of services, we've chosen a different path by keeping them all in-house. Luckily for us, the marketplace is noticing. We attracted more new clients in 2017 than in any other year in our history. Many specifically due to their desire to avail themselves of this suite of services we call OneSource, which in essence is allowing them to purchase all of their insurance products under our roof. While that base of services would be sufficient for many firms, we dug a bit deeper by adding several non-insurance related services our clients have come to rely on. Services such as human resources counseling, compliance assistance, and more. This approach can be a life raft for companies as they navigate the often stormy conditions present in today's business and regulatory environment. These kinds of value-added services can only come about when vision, execution, dedication, and perseverance blend in the form of an excellent team. In today's age, technology too plays an important role. A role that historically has seen Bradley and Parker at the forefront, carefully utilizing technology to its fullest capacity, while at the same time never forgetting that the people are what really matter. So technology, this is something everybody in this room, primarily those of you who are younger than me, which is almost everybody in this room, this is something you guys have grown up with. You almost don't know any other way. And when I came into the business world in 1983, it was vastly different. I mean, it's, when I think about it, that's a long time ago, but in the history of the world, it's 10 seconds ago. And it is such a seismic shift in what we do now versus what we did then. In 1983, we didn't even have a fax machine. And now in 2018, we don't have any fax machines again. We lived on those things for 10 or 15 years. And now something we didn't have, then we had, has now been replaced by something else. All accounting functions were done manually. When I used to sell a policy, we used to record the premiums and the commissions on green ledger paper. And at the end of the month, if you wanted to get paid, you had to turn that in. They reviewed it. They issued a check. All done manually. No Quicken, no Citibank Online, whoever you use. None of this stuff existed. So during the time that I've been with our firm, we started to institute all of these kinds of things. Now I have to say that when I first got there, we were automated to some degree. We were really very lucky because our CEO at the time, who was a 58-year-old Yale WASP graduate, so think about that kind of, stereotype. Back in 1983, that would be the last guy who would ever think wants to talk about a computer. Yet he was very forward-thinking, and we were one of the first insurance companies of our type to be automated, and that was really under his leadership. So when I got there, they were just kind of starting to do that. But there was still paper everywhere, there were typewriters everywhere, just a completely different way of doing business than what we have today. So today, there's hardly a paper in sight, we're in a totally paperless environment, and these things all had to be managed. And today, again, we all take this stuff for granted, but I can remember a story that part of what sometimes you have to do in insurance is you have to give somebody a price, right? And there's computations involved in that. We used to do them with a rating manual and a calculator. So we had a very good manager in our firm who had been with us for a long time, lovely woman, and we wrote a computer program for her that would automate that whole thing. So instead of having to take all this information and look it up in books and get the calculator and the pencil, she just started the program, inputted the variables, and out came the price. She hated it. Didn't want anything to do with it. And part of my job was to get her to do it. So, you do that, I think, by kind of, if you just order people to do things, that's usually not a good solution. So you try to bring them along, you try to get some consensus. And the funny thing about Terry, which was her name, was that probably 5 or 10 years later, she was leading the charge in automation. And if anybody gave her a piece of paper, she'd be like, what is this? This should be scanned and I should be getting it in my inbox. So, you really can change people and people can adapt to new things. So, it's just amazing to me how far we have come in the technology space. I've always been interested in that. It's probably one of the reasons why, as was mentioned in that generous introduction, I do a lot of work for ListNet, which is a Long Island association of technology companies and software developers. Our team is also clearly focused on our company's goals, but more importantly, the needs of our clients. This kind of mindset only comes about when the culture of a company is challenging, nurturing, inclusive, and caring. Such a culture exists at our company, where most managers have risen through the ranks, and so many of our people have been part of this extended family for years. One reason for this spirit of camaraderie may well be that Bradley & Parker is employee-owned. Since 1990, an ESOP, which stands for Employee Stock Ownership Plan, has held the majority of the stock in the company, and together we have achieved almost constant growth and significantly enhanced shareholder value, clear benefits for our employee owners. So, what's an ESOP? Well, first, I couldn't remember what it stands for, so thank you for that. That's what happens when you hit 55. It's all downhill after this over time. So our company was privately held. There were a number of shareholders that owned the stock of the company, and we had 2 shareholders that were ready to retire. And they obviously, they don't leave for free, so they want to get paid when they leave. So we were looking at how to do that, and one of the options that we were considering was this thing called an ESOP. And basically what that means is a trust is established that buys the shares from those exiting shareholders, and that trust is for the behalf of the employees. So each employee, therefore, becomes an owner of the company. So this was 1989, we started to talk about this. That car company that tries harder, Avis, they were one of the first people that did this that was well known. So at the time, this was pretty forward thinking. There weren't a lot of people doing this, and there weren't really a lot of medium-sized companies doing it. It was mostly larger businesses. So we went and hired a consultant and looked at it and thought that it would be a good option for us. And we thought that because, first of all, there were some good tax benefits to doing that. Those of us who were leading the company now were all still pretty young. It wasn't like we were, rolling around in cash. So in order to take the company back private from these shareholders, the tax benefits were certainly attractive. What was more attractive to me, though, was the idea that by sharing the ownership of the company with the employees, we would create a more unified culture. And that has absolutely happened. So in part of my prepared remarks just a few seconds ago, I mentioned that we have a lot of long-term people. So in our management team, I don't think there's any manager that we hired in their present position. And what I mean by that is they all came up through the ranks. So you heard about me. I started in sales, went into operations, was a senior VP, was an executive VP, and now I'm CEO. We have another young woman who started, this is the best story, right? She's literally started in the mail, sorting mail. And she's now the managing director of our private client services division. So, and we have these stories all throughout the company. And I really do believe that a part of the reason that things are so sticky, that things stick so long, is because of this camaraderie we develop because of the employee ownership. And the longer they stay, the way these plans are set up, the longer you stay, the more shares you get. And if everybody works hard and the share value goes up, you get more shares and each one is worth more money, it's a pretty good value proposition. So it's been very good for our company. And we put that in, like I said, we had the consultants in 89 and we put it in 1990, so it's been a very long time. And it's been so long, we've had a number of people retire, which is when they usually take their money out. And they're pretty happy when they retire, and for the next 5 years, every December they get a big check. So it's been a very good thing for our company. I'm kind of surprised more companies don't do it. I think, unfortunately, part of the reason for that is greed. So, that's something you always have to contend with in the corporate world. I said I would take questions at any time. Does anybody have anything thus far? Don't be shy. Okay. You can just stop me at any time if you have something. So we've had 3 years of steady, sustained growth across all of our practices. As we closed out 2017, we sold nearly $115 million in insurance premium, up from $100 million just 2 years ago. So again, it seems like what we're doing is working. The rewards aren't just financial, though. Our team takes a great deal of pride in how, by doing their best, we are able to enhance the client experience and deliver maximum value to them. They take pride, too, in the many charity and community initiatives we support, both financially and with commitments, just importantly, of time and effort. A company and its people are not simply judged by just what they can produce, but how they give back. So charity, charitable contributions, charitable works, these are things we all hear about. And I wanted to spend some time talking about those today. One of the things I see from the generation that most of you guys represent that I'm very heartened about is that I see much more of a sense of charity and community than I did like when I was your age. It seemed kind of like back then, you know, doing something for somebody else, getting involved in a charitable effort, it didn't really sound like it was the cool thing to do. And, you know, there were better ways to spend your time and money. And I see things very differently now, both myself personally, but again from the generations behind me that are coming up. So, as was mentioned earlier, I'm currently chair of the American Heart Association. I like to say that's my second day job. I'm finishing up my term this coming September, I guess. And we do a lot of work throughout the year. And one of the events we do is the heart walk. So, you know, everybody now does a walk, breast cancer does a walk, Alzheimer's does a walk, autism does a walk. The Heart Association was the one that started the walking, and I'm not sure how long we've been doing it, but it's years. So what we do now is we go to Jones Beach, and we walk the boardwalk. I think it's about 3 miles. And people set up, now they set up web pages and get donations. And, you know, if you walk the 3 miles, we get people to donate. And last year, I think we raised about $500,000 here in Long Island doing that. So it's a very big fundraiser for American Heart. And when we go to that walk, the vast majority of people are young people, which is just so encouraging to me that you guys are all getting involved in those kinds of efforts. It's funny because sometimes one of the challenges I have in leading my ragtag group of men, because I do lead mostly men these days in the brokerage effort, is that, you know, we kind of have to talk them into doing charity work. You know, this is, everybody, especially when you have some level of success, should be giving something back. And, you know, financially, obviously, is one way. But I think more importantly is volunteering, advocacy, things of that nature, where, you know, the work that you do, the money that you raise, the awareness that you create, really changes people's lives. And, you know, in the case of the one that I'm so involved with, American Heart, they save lives. Everybody here has heard of a heart stent, right? So that's a procedure that's saved. God knows how many lives it was introduced probably a couple of decades ago. That research that developed that was funded exclusively by the Heart Association. And there are many, many, many stories like that. So it's not very hard to connect the dots between the charitable work, the advocacy, the education, and the results. So it's just not some nebulous thing that's out there. We can really make a difference. And as you guys consider your careers and what you have coming up in front of you, you should try to keep that someplace in one of the quadrants up there. So hopefully the remarks I've made give you some insight into what our company does and how we've survived and thrived for almost 80 years. So I told you guys I've been there 32, but the company was established in 1939. So that's a very long time. And undoubtedly the ability of our company to sustain that is its present and past team members and their ability to change with the times. And that ability has really been what's made this long trip possible. You definitely can't stay stagnant and in place and think you're going to make it. We have seen competitors fall left and right because they didn't want to change. So that's a real key thing to me. So that was when, you know, they asked me to speak. I thought I would talk about these change topics, transition, change. staying stuck is really a recipe for disaster in business. I think it's probably a recipe for disaster in life, but it's definitely a recipe for disaster in business. I mean, you know, even a great restaurant, if they don't change their menu every few years, they have a tough time. And it's surprising to see that many, many people are so resistant to change, right? That's the case. People don't generally like change. We get into a comfort zone and, you know, things are pretty good. Why should I stir the pot? And so it's kind of tempting to stay there. But I can tell you, in my experience with business, those people usually don't survive. And we've seen them retire, we've seen them go out of business, and we've acquired more than our fair share of them because they didn't move into some of those areas I mentioned before. They didn't buy into the technology. They didn't buy into the paperless environment. So, you know, much sooner than they wanted to, they ended up selling to me, who was kind of the bad guy, and we dragged them into the 20th century once we acquired them. So I think being open to change, not resisting it, not just sticking in your comfort zone, are a set of skills that are really good to have and good to try to keep open to. Because sometimes it's tough. Sometimes it's tough. I'm very fortunate to lead the team that we have now. They're just an outstanding group. As I've mentioned a few times, I've been with the firm 32 years, and that really is a long time. Yet I can without hesitation state that the team we have now is the best I've ever had the opportunity to work with. A team where both individual and corporate goals sit side by side, working in perfect tandem. We have an environment that encourages creativity, friendly competition, and at the same time discourages the kind of dark competition and chaos that can often sabotage a company and people in achieving its goals. So, probably the hardest thing I do now on a daily basis, besides dealing with the occasional irate client, is leading the team. And our firm right now, we have about 75 full-time people. So we're not huge by any stretch of the imagination, but we're really not small either. And, you know, you put 75 people in a room, you get, you know, I don't know, 74 personality types, right? Maybe there's somebody there that's similar. So trying to keep everybody on game plan, keep everybody on message, keep everybody motivated, that's definitely the hardest thing that I do. And some of these things, I think the biggest attribute I can say that's helpful to that charge is empathy and understanding. I think a lot of corporate leaders, corporate managers, kind of have the drill sergeant mentality. And, you know, in popular culture, we kind of all know what that is, right? You know, he's the big burly guy, usually has a buzz cut, and he's barking out orders. And you see that. You see that in the corporate environment. A lot of times when we make new hires, we hear stories that that's where they're coming from. That, you know, they're walking up and down the aisles and screaming and asking them what's going on and why are you on this phone call, and, you know, why is your iPhone out, you know, all these kinds of things. And I don't know, that to me, I always try to put myself in the position of those people, right, because I was one of those people, and I wouldn't be so excited if, you know, some barrel-chested guy with a crew cut came running down the hall telling me to put away my iPhone. So, you know, I think the idea of leading a team in a collaborative spirit is a much better option. It's worked for us. We have a very good group, as I mentioned. As I also mentioned, a lot of them have been there for a long time. So it seems to be that works. One of the other issues that we have is that, as with many organizations that have a component of sales, there's always this dichotomy, there's always this difference, this chasm between what we call production side people and operation side people. So the production side people are basically the salespeople, and whoever leads them, supports them in that role. And the operations people are the people that stay behind and do most of the work. Now, the salespeople, they don't believe that. They think they do most of the work. It's a very, very different personality type. The people that do well in those sales types of jobs on the production side are usually, not always, but usually very, very different from the people on the operations side. And one of the challenges is, despite the fact that they're different, and despite the fact that often they don't like each other very much, they really do need to work together. Because if they don't work together, the clients are not well served. And if the clients are not well served, they'll go someplace else. And obviously, that's not a good thing. So one of the big challenges is trying to find ways to make these people work together better. And again, I think empathy is a big issue here. And that's not so much for a manager's empathy for their employees, it's the manager's ability to push out empathy to those people so that the salespeople understand the issues and problems that the operations people have. And conversely, that the operations people understand that, even though the sales piece looks easy, because these are the guys that go out, they have the company cars usually, they have the expense accounts, they go into the ball games, all this stuff, and it looks like they're having a good time. That's a really hard job. It's a really hard job. You kind of have to be a performer. Whenever you're in front of a client, you have to be on, because if you're not on, it's probably not going to work. And in most cases, in most sales jobs, at the end of the day, no matter what they tell you, the phrase that some of my guys like to use is, you eat what you kill. So, if your sales aren't so good, at some point you're either going to not be making enough money, or you're not going to have a job. So, these folks are under constant pressure to perform. And it's not easy. So, I think one of the things that makes it easier for me to deal with these types of things is because of the way that I came up in the firm. So, I started in sales, so I had to deal with that. And then I moved over to operations, so I had to deal with that. So I've been kind of on both sides of that fence, and it's funny, the two most successful salespeople that I knew in our firm were me and another guy, and we had a very similar style in dealing with operations. We were nice to them. Gee, what a concept, right? If we needed them to do something for us right away, we went over and said, gee, could you do me a big favor and do this right away? This guy's really on my case. I need to get this done. And, more times than not, people would do it. So today, sometimes when I walk by and we have one of our heavy-hitting brokers, the guy's making $600,000 a year selling insurance. This is the money that's available out there. And, he's talking to somebody who's making a nice living, but $75,000, $80,000 at a desk. And, I need this now. Oh, I don't know, how's that working for you? And then the other one I love is that when they come to complain, right, they'll come to me to complain, or they'll go to their manager to complain, and eventually it gets up to me, and I say to them, and this was advice I got from a dear friend of mine, when I did my share of complaint one day, and he said to me, and I say to these folks, listen, I can go, have you dealt with this with them yet? Have you talked to them like a human being, person to person, about this issue? Or you were just coming to me and throwing them under the bus? Oftentimes you get the answer, well, I'm just coming to you, I came to you first. And that advice I got so many years ago that I give to people today is, well, listen, we know that, your manager runs the show or I run the show, and we can go talk to that person. But there's only one, when we talk to them, they're going to know there's only one way that I know about this situation. And that's because you threw them under the bus. How do you think that's going to help your relationship going forward? Where if you talk to them yourself and you try to settle your differences between you in a spirit of collaboration, that seems to me to be a much better course. So that's the kind of mentality that we try to push out at our firm, and it seems to work. One of the other challenges that we have is managing these salespeople. So salespeople are notorious. The good ones, most of the good ones tend to be pretty demanding. I'm glad none of them are here now. They tend to be high maintenance, right? That's a good word these days, but they're very high maintenance. They whine. It's tough. So you kind of have to deal with these folks and keep them grounded. I think some of it is the same issues we see these days in sports teams, where you just a lot of times have the managers and the coaches are making less money than the players, and there seems to be often some disarray there. Who's really leading the team? So those are some tough problems. And the best way to deal with it, again, is through collaboration, through talking, through keeping the lines of communication open, keeping everybody aware of what your expectations are, letting them know behaviors that you're going to tolerate and letting them know behaviors, more importantly, that you're not going to tolerate. And any sales manager, any CEO that's involved in a sales team, one of the things you want to do is we want to have happy employees, we want to have happy clients, but we also want more clients. And as I mentioned before, if you don't keep growing and changing, you don't survive. So you always have to get new business. And you need to motivate these folks to do that. And a lot of times, in what I think is a mistake, managers and leaders do this by competition. And, competition is a very good thing, obviously. Not usually, I shouldn't say that. It sometimes leads to very good results. It also often leads to acrimony, where too much emphasis is put on the competition and, nastiness kind of ensues. And there's a fight for proposal time, there's a fight for computer time, there's a fight for everything because, I got to make this number. And we really don't have that in our firm. And I think the reason we don't have it, it goes back to the same kind of a theme that I'm espousing here, is we don't have it because we encourage collaboration. We encourage the concept of team. People can do well individually under a team effort. I mean, we all know that. The sports analogies are often the easiest. A quarterback can have an absolutely great game, and the team can also win. Sometimes the quarterback can have a crappy game, and the team still wins. So, I think a lot of times people don't think that those goals are truly possible to have together, but I really think that they are. But you need to encourage that. We have a meeting every Friday morning. It's a pretty informal meeting. It doesn't last that long. It's like an hour. And all of these high-end salespeople are involved, and we talk to them and ask them what's bothering them, what's good, what's bad, and you just keep the conversation going, and it leads to a much, much smoother environment than having everybody walled off into their own silos. Just tends to lead to anarchy, which is a very bad thing in a business environment. Our environment is also diverse, friendly, and welcoming. I always thought that was the case at our company, but I experienced it firsthand about a year ago now when I went through a major life change and was resoundingly supported by our entire company, and in particular by our management team. Transitioning at a later age is certainly not unheard of, and we all know the Caitlyn Jenner story. But my transition while in a leadership role in business is a true reality show, not one scripted for TV. I was glad, though, to find when I really started to plan my transition that there were at least a few who had successfully pulled it off. Martine Rothblatt created Sirius Radio and was the chair of the satellite giant WorldSpace when she transitioned in 1994. And more recently, Christine Hallquist, who came out just a couple of years ago while the CEO of a Vermont power company, and is now running for governor in that state. I certainly can't compare myself with these two stellar women and what they've achieved, but I sure did stand on their shoulders when I was ready to come out. So, here I am. I've worked with the same company for 32 years. In January of last year, I was appointed CEO. And in May, I transitioned. So nobody in the company, well, that's not true. One person knew. Nobody else in the company knew. I took 2 weeks off. I had some medical procedures done, updated my wardrobe, got some makeup tips from some folks in New York City, and went back to work the day after Memorial Day as the new me. Definitely anxiety producing. I have to say that from my perspective, it has gone off pretty much without a hitch. And I really think that that is in large part due to these people that are at our company that I've spent so much time this morning talking about, and that I spent some time explaining how we do things. And I've spent some time explaining the kind of culture we try to maintain. And that when we hire new people, we like to have them fit into that culture. And I think it's because of that kind of group that we have that my transition has been so easy. Not everybody has it so easy. And don't for a minute think that I don't know that I have the benefit of privilege. I'm not so sure if I was still an insurance salesperson going door to door in Brooklyn, how many policies I would sell. I don't know that. I don't know if I was a mid-level manager, what would happen. I don't know that. You know, where I am now, if somebody really had a problem with it, I get to say, well, if you don't like it, leave. Not everybody has that. Now, out of the 70 people or so we have, again, I'm really lucky. I don't really think that the acceptance I have there has to do with the privilege. I think I'm really, really fortunate. We have a very tight-knit group. We do a lot of social things together. We do a lot of this charity work together. I would have picked up some vibes. Some of my really good friends would have picked up some vibes and we wouldn't have. So I'm very fortunate that I don't think my privilege has helped me at work so much. I think it's helped me in other areas. There's a lot of costs involving transition. Some of them now you guys know I'm in insurance, right? Some of them now are actually covered by insurance, and that has a lot to do with the ACA or Obamacare. So now if you can, you know, the insurance companies still, you know, they don't like to give their money away. They're not rolling over easily. But, you know, if the insurance companies get the correct story, you know, that this is really a life change you need to make, and that you're under a doctor's care and you're under a therapist's care, the fact is they have to pay for it. And that's pretty much in every state now. So that's a huge, huge shift. Huge. You know, medical treatments, if not covered, cost thousands and thousands of dollars. So, you know, some people that are transitioning opt for hormone therapy. You know, these drugs cost hundreds of dollars a month and they weren't covered. Some people opt for some cosmetic surgery to make their features different. Also not covered, and you might imagine, you know, not cheap. And then, of course, there's gender confirmation surgery. Probably everybody knows what that is. That's what everybody always wants to know about. Ridiculously expensive. I mean, you know, I think here in this country, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000. So you can go to Thailand and get it done, and they actually do very good work there. But, you know, do you really want to go to Thailand? This is a major operation. That's a long way from home. And there, I think it costs about $15,000. And then, you know, you have your travel expenses. You have to stay there for 3 weeks. You probably want somebody with you because it's not something you want to do by yourself. So there's been a big seismic shift because now these things are covered. So, like 5 years ago, if you wanted to have any of these things done here in New York, you were out of luck. You had to go either to Thailand, or there were some people in California, a couple down in Pennsylvania. There were some areas in the country, but here in New York City, where we have all these big hospitals, there was nobody doing it. Now we have at least two. Mount Sinai and NYU. And they have a very long waiting list now, because they're all doing this now pretty much fully covered by insurance. And obviously, there's deductibles and co-pays and things like that. So a lot of people who didn't have the option before to do this now can. And of course, there's also some concern because of our president, that's not what I meant to say, but that's like a Freudian slip. Our present administration in Washington, you know, they're not exactly transgender or any other rights lovers friendly. And, you know, they've rolled back some of the stuff they did in the military. They rolled back some of the things that we got in schools to protect the kids. So a lot of people are kind of rushing because they're afraid that the next thing that's going to go is healthcare, as they keep threatening. So I think, you know, right now things are pretty good because of that. Not because of what's going on in the administration, but because of the conditions on the ground that they are right now. There's a lot of availability. People can talk about it, and they can get the help they need. People's transitions, as many people that transition, it takes as many forms as people who transition. So, you know, you'll have people that opt to do nothing. They just change the way they present their gender, and that's what's right for them, and that's the experience that's right for them. There's other people that just do the hormones and don't do the surgery. Then there's people that do all three. And most people in the community, most in the medical community, most in the psychiatric community, will tell you that all of those things are valid. You know, everybody's transition is what it is, and it's how they feel and how they want to present and the things that they want to do. Interestingly enough, some of the worst prejudice in the trans community comes from the trans people. So a lot of times people that have gone through all of these stages that I'm talking about, you know, they have the surgery and they're all the way on the other side of the river. They view people that don't have those as somehow less trans, less female, less of a woman. So that's kind of problematic. But, you know, if you look at any community, you're always going to have some people that are kind of on the fringe and, you know, are not playing nice in the sandbox, right? We all have those experiences. So you really can't let that poison. But it is out there, and I find it kind of ironic that some of the biggest resistance you get is from some of our own people. My transition has been affirming for me. I thought long and hard before doing this. Make no mistake, this is not an easy decision. This is not something you should do, you know, at the tip of a hat. And there are some guidelines in place that a lot of people who are transitioning or thinking of transitioning don't like, but there are some guidelines in place that most of the medical community uses. It's something called WPATH, and it's basically just kind of a set of parameters that the medical community wants you to go through before you do things that, you know, pretty much are irreversible. And I think a lot of people, when they're starting the transition, think that that's kind of intrusive, and, you know, they're forced to kind of wait. But having gone through the experience, I think that it's probably a valuable thing. Some of these cues and some of these signals and some feelings people have are not sometimes what they seem, and it's really best to ferret all of that out and to make sure you're going in the right direction before you make a major life change that, you know, is difficult, not impossible, is difficult to reverse. I'm certainly a happier person than I was a year ago. I don't ever think I was like really miserable. I mean, you have to ask my friends and some of my partners about that, but I don't think I was ever really miserable. But most people would tell you that I'm happier now, and I appear happier now than I was before. That's the way I feel, so I'm glad that they see that. It's really heartening to me to find the respect and the acceptance that you get from most people. A lot of people made fun of Caitlyn Jenner, particularly people of my generation. And she also was not very accepted by the trans community because, you know, they believe she's just had an easy time because of her privilege. And I'm sure that, like me, obviously in a different stratosphere, but like me, she probably has had an easier time because of her privilege. You know, she doesn't have to go to the bargain rack at Target to try to find new clothes. She just goes and buys whatever she wants, and probably has a stylist do it, right? I'm sure she's not doing this herself, particularly on her reality show. But the fact of the matter is, she still went through that personal transition. And the fact of the matter is that those things that were deep inside her that made her want to do this are just as hard for her as anybody else. The other thing that's interesting to me about her is that, as ridiculed as she kind of was by some in the trans community and by some in, you know, the community at large, she absolutely, definitely made it easier for me to come out. I mean, that's just a fact. I've spent a lot of time telling you folks about some of these people I work with. A few of these people I work with are really like my best friends. One particular guy I know I've known him for almost 30 years. And his office is right next to mine. We've done a lot of great stuff together. We've traveled together. We've gotten married together. We've gotten divorced together. Not to each other. And, you know, this is a kind of guy who's, you know, he's like a man's man, you know, that whole stereotype. And he was completely fine with this. He never missed a beat. Our relationship is completely the same. And I'm not so sure that isn't in large part to the way the world has been over the past few years. With a lot of people in that kind of environment, when they see somebody like a Caitlyn Jenner, who used to be Bruce Jenner, right? This big, sophisticated, not sophisticated really, but this big sports, athletic person who did all these great things, they see her make this major life change, and it's like, well, you know, if it can happen to them, it can happen to anybody. So I think that that's definitely helped grease the skids a little bit in the world for trans people. My biggest fear, well, not my biggest, that would be a lie. But one of my biggest fears has to do, and I'm not going to use his name because he'd probably be embarrassed. We have a client that probably most of you know. He's a very well-known business person here in the Northeast, and he has a habit of doing his own ads on TV. It's like it's like he's never far from me because it seems that every night when I'm watching something on TV for the hour or so I watch, he's on. He's in his 70s. He is the absolute typical European conservative, straight up and down guy. He's been a client, I handle him personally. His company's been a client of ours for about 6 or 7 years. So this was one I actually got myself when I told you they let me out sometimes. I got this a few years ago. And I had to tell him. And that was not easy. So I crafted a letter. I thought it would be best to do in writing. And sent it to him. And within 15 minutes, I got an email response, and I'm paraphrasing, but I'm pretty close. It said something like, "This changes nothing. Our relationship will just grow stronger. Best to you, regards." That was incredible to me. Incredible. The next day, box arrives in my office. I open the box up. It's from him. It's a bottle of Dom Perignon. So the reason I like to tell that story, and I tell that story a lot, is because in this own personal situation that I went through, but in other situations that we all go through, don't assume you know the results of what people are going to do. If you had given me a scorecard of the person that I was going to have the most problem with, I would have told you it was him. Unequivocally, he would have been on the top of the list. I was seriously nervous about losing that business. And it's a big income account for our company. I was seriously nervous about it. So I have to tell you, too, that after that all happened, I was like really empowered. I was like, well, geez, if I got him, I can get anybody now. So I hope that you guys found this chat valuable. Again, I'm pretty used to speaking in public, but in a very different forum. So I was very happy to have the opportunity to do this. I think it was worth my 30 minutes or so. I hope it was worth yours. Are there any questions?
There must be some questions.
Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like you've kind of bounced around to a lot of various business. And I work with people who are like unemployed that like are coming from sectors that, because there's so much progression in the world, like don't exist anymore.
Right.
So what do you think are like the highlights of the transferable skills that you have that allowed you to go from one thing to another?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and it's one of, it's kind of the content behind your question is really one of the great worries that a lot of us have here in Long Island that are in leadership roles in business. And that's that Long Island is going from what used to be a very robust manufacturing community where we made things into this community of service people. You know, like where I am in Melville, if you look up and down the street, there's accounting firms, there's lawyers, there's God knows there's plenty of insurance people, there's insurance people left and right, and you're like, okay, well, who are these guys doing all this service for? Because we're not making anything here anymore. So that's a very tough question. Transferable skills, that's really, you know, it's kind of above my pay grade. It's one thing to be in a corporate office environment in a service company, which I was at, and go from a sales role to an operations role. That's really a matter of, you know, what I did was, and I tell this to people all the time, the best thing you do, this is really sophisticated advice, probably the best thing I'm going to tell you today though, fake it till you can make it, right? Tell them you got it, you'll take care of it, fake it till you can make it. But the thing is, you know, you can fake it, but while you're faking it, you've got to make sure you're going to make it. You really have to learn the skill set. That's not impossible or even terribly hard to do in a service corporate environment. When you have somebody that has like manufacturing skills and that evaporates and now they have to move into some other environment, that's a very difficult problem. And really not something I have an answer for. It's very difficult because you can have, you can tell those kinds of people, you can give them all the rah-rah speeches you want, but if you don't have the skill, it's tough to get hired. So I think the best advice that I can give, that I do give to people in those situations, is if you can't fake it till you can make it, then you need to get training. You kind of need to find out what you think you might want to do and see what you can learn and get trained to do to make yourself of value to those kinds of firms. So I had a very dear friend of mine's son who came to me kind of with the same question. And he didn't want an office job, candidly, I told him, listen, if you want an office job, I can, we can take you, I have a lot of connections, I'll send you a resume and I'll get you a job, but he didn't want that. So he went to technical training school, a pretty good one, and is now doing extremely well as an HVAC contractor. So, there's different paths, I think. But the key thing is you have to remain open to those different paths, and sometimes you're going to need to do some work at the outset in order to make yourself valuable to a prospective employer.
Other questions?
Sure.
I actually have to run, but
Okay.
I just want to say I respect your courage
Oh, thanks.
to be who you want to be. So,
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay, folks, thanks so much. Go.
So I work in the Career Center at Hofstra.
In the Career Center?
Yeah. So how do you see hiring trends lately? How is it right now? How are things, everything seems to be a bit more of on an upswing?
So I can tell you in our industry, in our business right now, when we have openings, it's tough for us to fill them. As far as skilled labor goes, right now I think we're at pretty good employment here in Long Island. There are pockets, to this young man's question before, where there's an issue because those jobs aren't here. But in the industries that are doing well here, I think we're in a good position, and it's a good time to be looking for employment if you're in those kinds of operations and fields. I mentioned that I'm on the board of ListNet, and one of the biggest things we do at ListNet is to try to encourage technology companies to stay here. I think when we formed ListNet about 15, 20 years ago, our kind of hope was that we were going to replace the defense industry here in Long Island with the technology industry. And, we had a pretty good start with CA and some of the other companies, but that really hasn't happened the way we would have liked. We have a lot of talent moving off Long Island. My concern is less the career opportunities here now than it is for people to afford to stay in this area. That's what I get concerned. I look at our own people, and unlike a lot of firms our size, we really like to hire trainees. So we have a lot of entry-level positions available over time. You come to us with no experience and we want a college degree, but that's about it. If we think it's a good fit, we'll train those people and try to get them into a career in insurance. But it concerns me because, I know what it costs to live here. And, the starting salary in Long Island for a single person in those kinds of entry-level jobs, unless you're still living home, that's tough. It's not easy. So that's the biggest concern I have for our area. And there's no easy solutions to that one either, because that has to do with housing and apartment houses, and it's not really worth it for the developers to put up the apartment houses when they can put up a condo that they can make more money because it's all money motivated. So those are tough things. But I think right now the hiring trends are pretty good.
Wonderful. Darlene, you're going to have to get Wynn's contact information.
I'll be connecting with you on
listen,
LinkedIn.
as an old salesperson, I figured as soon as I opened my mouth on that one, I was going to get sold.
I'm sure many of our students after your presentation would be interested in working at such a wonderful company.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much,
Oh,
Wynne,
you're
for
welcome.
such a